Hello friends and history buffs, how are you? I hope everything is well. Today we are stepping into the shadow of Vlad III, into that dark story which I have shuddered over the most in my life. If this eerie history journey interests you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Also, thinking of this suffocating atmosphere, I wondered, what is your favorite music genre? Let's meet in the comments. The man known to history as Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III, or Vlad Dracula, was possibly born in November or December of 1431 in the citadel of Sișoara, in the Principality or Voship of Wachia, which today lies in modern-day Romania. However, there is no certainty in this, such is the lack of substantial records for the time and place, and it is also possible that he was born at some stage in the late 1420s. Vlad's father was Prince Vlad II, ruler of Wachia, the illegitimate son of Prince Myra I, the Brave of Wachia. The identity of Vlad the Impaler's mother is not known for certain, but many historians believe she was Vlad II's first wife, Cagna, also called Apraxia of Moldavia, the eldest daughter of Prince Alexander the Good. Alternatively, Vlad the Impaler could also have been conceived by one of Vlad II's mistresses, but there is no way of knowing for sure, yet regardless of who his biological mother really was, Vlad was regarded as a legitimate son of Vlad II, also known as Vlad. Vlad the Impaler's early life, and indeed much of his subsequent career, can be examined best by looking closely at that of his father. Vlad II's early years were not well documented, but he was most likely kept as a hostage in the care of the Hungarian and German courts of the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund I in the 1400s and 1410s. Hostages, or pledges, as they were more often known at the time, were a regular feature of political life in 15th century Europe. These were used to secure the faithfulness of a follower by keeping a family member at the court of their lord. It was also a way to maintain the association between noble families and build relationships. For Vlad the Impaler's grandfather, Myra I, Vlad II's father, it allowed him to gain further access to the royal courts of Hungary and the Holy Roman Empire, as well as securing a more opportunistic future for his illegitimate son. Conversely, for Sigismund, it allowed him to ensure the loyalty of the VIP of Wachia on the eastern borders of the Kingdom of Hungary. As a consequence of the arrangement, Vlad II was educated as a nobleman at the Hungarian court, and most likely converted from Eastern Orthodoxy to Roman Catholicism, the standard faith of the Holy Roman Empire, while he was staying in Hungary or the German states. After Myra I's death in 1418, Vlad II was no longer required to remain at the court of Emperor Sigismund, but chose instead to stay on as the emperor's page, allowing him to further his chivalric and aristocratic education. His half-brother Michael I succeeded their father back home in Wachia, but Michael himself died shortly thereafter in 1420. At this juncture, Vlad II turned his focus on acquiring the VIP of Wachia for himself, competing with his surviving family members, as well as the other illegitimate children of Myra, for the title. It is worth assessing the political landscape of southeastern Europe, the region in which Vlad II and Vlad the Impaler would operate throughout their lives. At this juncture, for centuries, the Balkans region had been largely dominated by the Byzantine Empire, the name for the state which had survived from the Eastern Roman Empire in the Eastern Mediterranean, after the Western Roman Empire was overrun and collapsed in the 5th century. But the Byzantine Empire was on its knees by the late 14th and early 15th centuries, controlling little more than the city of Constantinople, the city known as Istanbul today. guarding the gateway between Europe and Asia, as well as some small territories in Greece. Much of its other territories in regions such as Anatolia in western Turkey, Bulgaria, and Macedonia had been conquered by the rising power in the region. The Ottoman Turks, a Muslim power who had expanded out of the region, approximating to modern-day Turkey. Further to the northwest, the main power was the Christian kingdom of Hungary, the ruler of which was Emperor Sigismund, at whose court Vlad II was a pledge for so many years. And then between the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire were several small states, such as the Kingdom of Serbia, the Kingdom of Bosnia, the VIP of Wallachia, and the Principality of Transylvania, the latter two constituting much of modern-day Romania in the 15th century. There were two processes playing out across the region. Firstly, the Ottomans were set on capturing Constantinople and bringing the long-lived Byzantine Empire to an end. Secondly, the Ottoman sultans wished to expand further northwest into Christian Europe. In the process, the buffer states on Hungary's eastern and southern borders, such as the V-ship of Wallachia, would become key battlegrounds during the 15th century in the fight against Ottoman expansion. Indeed, fighting had occurred at the Battle of Kosovo in June 1389, when the Ottomans clashed in a bloody but indecisive battle against the Serbs, Bosnians, and other Christian powers in the Balkans. In the aftermath of this, the Serbs were weakened to the extent that they largely became vassals of the Ottomans at the time of Vlad III's birth around 1431. Wallachia was still largely a client principality of the Kingdom of Hungary, but this was increasingly challenged by the Ottomans, and many of the Bobo or nobles of Wallachia were considering which side it would be best to be on as the Turkish expansion continued. Both Vlad the Impaler and Vlad II would be highly involved in these affairs. The population of the Principality of Wallachia was just as distinctive as its geography, made up of different cultures, including Transylvanians, Slovaks, Germans, Greeks, Hungarians, Roma slaves, Jews and Turks, and followers of various religions, including Eastern Orthodoxy and Christianity. But there were also Protestants, Jews, Muslims, pagans, and Catholics. The land and its people were battle-scarred, hardened by the continual fighting, external pressures, and internal upheaval from serving as the field upon which wars were fought by the Islamic and Christian armies for the fate of Europe. As an illegitimate son of Mira I, Vlad II was not directly in line for the throne following his half-brother's death in 1420, but he would ultimately reign as the fifth twice, firstly from 1436 till 1442, and again from 1443 until his death in 1447. But at the time of Vlad the Impaler's birth, this all lay ahead, and at that juncture Vlad II was assigned by the Hungarian nobles to serve at Sișoara to defend the region against any possible Ottoman incursion. His task was to defend the mountain passes from Transylvania into Wallachia from enemy raids, particularly from the Ottoman Empire, a powerful Islamic realm. If Wallachia fell to the Ottoman threat, this would potentially open the rest of Europe to a massive assault by the Islamic forces, weakening the Christian states. Upon coming to power in 1436, Vlad II found himself at a precarious crossroads, his principality torn between the growing strength of the Islamic Ottomans and the divisive factions of the Catholic European court. Vlad Dracula was expected to side with his fellow Christians against the Turks, who had already taken much of the Orthodox lands of the Byzantine Empire. In 1431, the same year Vlad the Impaler was born, his father was inducted into the Chevalier Order of the Dragon, a military order founded by Emperor Sigismund in 1408. The order was responsible for protecting Christian lands from their many enemies, particularly from the Ottoman Turks to the southeast. As a result of becoming a member of this prestigious order, Vlad II received the cognomen Dracula, derived from the word dra, or dragon, although in modern Romanian dra translates to the word devil. Vlad II Dra would have several children, 3 legitimate sons Myra to Vlad III and Ru the Handsome, and at least 1 illegitimate son, Vlad the Monk. The sons all received the sobriquet named Dracula, meaning son of the dragon. After Vlad II had been inducted into the Order of the Dragon, Dracula would become a synonymous moniker for Vlad the Impaler and a title he would proudly bear throughout his life, in contrast with modern times in which the name Dracula has become synonymous with evil. At the age of 5, Vlad Dracula, in line with his family's position as one of the bulwarks of Christian rule in the Balkans, protecting against the Ottoman advance, began training for knighthood at Tayo, learning the skills expected of a bower's son, including jousting, horsemanship, court etiquette, archery strategy, swimming, hunting, tracking, and combat training. Vlad excelled at these activities and seemed to thrive during the intensive physical training, building the foundation for his upcoming military career. It would serve him well in his future career as Prince of Wachia, and as a commander leading soldiers and volunteers against his many enemies. He would also have become familiar at an early age with the new firearms and cannons which were beginning to be introduced into Europe's armies and which would transform the nature of warfare in this highly militarized part of the world in the years ahead. And as second son of Vlad to the young Vlad, Dracula was raised in an aristocratic household alongside his siblings, educated as was appropriate for all young boor or nobles of the period, studying, reading, philosophy, writing, mathematics, the classics in different languages, under the tutelage of noble women tutors and courtiers. Vlad was most likely raised under the Eastern Orthodox faith, and was also taught history, politics, and the delicate nature of Wachia, and its place in the larger scheme of matters of land, faith, and war, following the deaths in quick succession of Emperor Sigismund in 1437, and then his successor as Holy Roman Emperor and King of Hungary, Albert II. On the 27th of October 1439, the Hungarian nobles voted What is War II of Poland in as the new King of Hungary. The following year, What is chose a Hungarian boyar and military commander, John Hunadi, also known as Janu of Hadara, to serve as Voe of Transylvania. Hunyadi sought to continue Hungarian influence in Wachia and demanded that Vlad II take part in his ongoing efforts to resist the Ottoman advance. Northwest, conversely, the Turks were seeking to invade the Principality of Transylvania at this time and asked the Huns to assist them. Vlad II ignored the Ottomans, turning to serve alongside the Hungarians and Transylvanians. John Hunyadi Vlad II and their allies successfully pacified the eastern counties, pushing the Turks back and ultimately reinstating the protection of Hungary's southern border. In March 1442, when the future Vlad the Impaler was still only in his early teens, Vlad II was promptly accused of treason by the Ottomans for helping the Hungarians and faced reprisals shortly after his shared victory over the Turks. Vlad Dracula brought his sons, Vlad and Ru, to the court of Sultan Murad II, and all of them were immediately imprisoned by the Ottomans and held until a new alliance could be arranged between Vlad II and the Turks. The Sultan demanded payment and a show of loyalty, so Vlad Dracula could redeem himself in the eyes of the Turks. For his efforts he reluctantly agreed, handing over his sons to the Sultan as hostages until the debt was repaid to the Ottomans. All of this highlights the increasing difficulties faced by the nobles of Wachia in this period, caught as they were between two powers, the King of Hungary and the Ottoman Sultan, who both viewed the Huns as their subjects. Vlad II returned to Wachia from the Ottoman court, having left his sons behind as pledges, only to find that he had been replaced with Basarab Drol's cousin by John Hunadi. During his absence, Hunyadi then turned his focus on the approaching Ottoman army and defeated them in August 1442 following the Turk attempt to annex Wachia. Vlad Draco tried to remain neutral during the period of his son's imprisonment and hoped to see them released shortly after, while he also sought during the mid-1440s to build a relationship between the Turks and the Christians of W and Abu, Hungary, hoping for a diplomatic resolution to the growing tensions which Wachia had become the epicenter of. In the course of the mid-1440s, Vlad II Dracula's compromised position, in which his sons were effectively being held as shy for his good behavior by the Ottomans, was eventually uncovered in Buda, the Hungarian capital, infuriating the Hungarians, who, under the command of Hunyadi, led an attack against Vlad II for his eldest son Mira to flee with the aid of the Ottomans. Vlad II was able to overthrow the Hungarians and retake Wachia, but his success was short-lived. The Boyars, led by a cousin of Vlad's confusingly called Vladislav, overthrew him and sought to gain aid from John Hunyadi. To prevent Vlad Dracula from returning the coup by the Boers resulted in Vlad II having to raise an army with the help of the Ottomans, who had remained behind, and a recruit from Wachia. Hunadi and his forces arrived, and in 1447 the Hungarians, Transylvanians, and the Wakan Boaz, led by Vladislav, defeated Vlad Dracula and Mira's armies, capturing Mira. Mira was subsequently tortured, having his eyes burned out and then being buried alive. Vladra returned to avenge his son, but was captured and executed shortly after, most likely either by being beheaded or burned at the stake at some point in November 1447. It is generally believed that Vladra was betrayed in this instance by his cousin Vladislav, who subsequently succeeded to the VOVP as Vladislav II in 1447. This background of political intrigue and in turns conflict, both within Wachia and the wider Balkans, would inform all of Vlad the Impaler's own career. He and his brother Radu had been left in the care of Sultan Murat II, who treated the children well despite their status as prisoners. The boys most likely witnessed the brutality that the Turks could inflict on their captives during the 1440s and were advised to remain obedient. According to many historical sources, the positive treatment of Vlad and Radu by the Sultan was due to their being regarded as guests rather than prisoners, in much the same way as their father had been well treated as a pledge at the court of Emperor Sigismund over 30 years earlier. The goal of such positive treatment was to engender the loyalty of the Wakan princes and ensure that they would one day return to Wachia and rule the Vovip as pro-Ottoman rulers who would ally with the Turks against the Hungarians and their allies. However, Vlad would prove impervious to these efforts to win him over. Vlad III and Ru Dracula continued their studies at the Ottoman court at the Egregor citadel in the Anatolian plateau, located in what is today's central Turkey. Despite their Christian background, the brothers studied the Quran as well as literature and the Persian and Turkish languages, receiving the traditional education of noblemen, which included logic, warfare, philosophy, combat, and horseback riding. Vlad threw himself into the fighting arts, his hatred for the Turks seeming to drive his training, focusing on his ultimate goal to become V of Wachia and annihilate the Ottomans. Despite the Ottomans' efforts to control the Wakan princes, Vlad fiercely resisted and was subjected to brutal punishment. As a result, Ru conversely embraced his experience with the Turks, converting to Islam and later volunteering to serve as a Jaizer, the elite household guards of the Ottoman sultans, who were usually former Christians who had converted to Islam and were also circumcised, as part of the process in this position. Radu grew close to the Sultan's son and heir, Mahmud, to who he would go on to serve later in his life. As a result of their closeness, rumors even spread in later years that the two were lovers. Ru's conversion, closeness with Mahmud II, and admiration for Ottoman culture infuriated Vlad Dracula and fueled his hate for the Ottomans after the death of his father and older brother at the hands of the Hungarians. Vlad Dracula now found himself to be the heir to his family's position within Wallachia, and with it a serious contender to claim VIP through the elective vote of the Wakan nobles the Boar. Moreover, the death of his father released Vlad and Ru from their captors, while Ru remained behind in Anatolia at this juncture to continue his service with the Turks. Vlad swore to avenge his family, as he perceived that his father and brother had perished as a result of Ottoman interference in Wallachia, and his half-brother was lost to him as someone who had Islamicized at the Ottoman court. But before he acquired his revenge, he needed an army to prevent the Hungarians from taking over Wallachia. Following Vlad II's death, the Turks, ironically enough, provided Vlad III Dracula with the army he needed to begin acquiring power back in Wallachia. No doubt the Sultan believed that he was effectively arming a vassal prince when he did so, though the Turks would learn in due course that this was certainly not the case. Armed with this Ottoman support, Vlad was able to seize power in Wallachia in 1448, when he was perhaps no more than 17 years of age. Certainly no more than 21, he successfully deposed his cousin Vladislav II. At this juncture, during a period when Vladislav was battling the Ottomans to the south, one of Vlad's first fabled acts as prince was to invite many of the Boer who may have been involved in his father and brother's death to a feast. According to some sources, he then had his men stab them and take them to be impaled as a show of strength. Although the truth of these claims is not certain, Vlad III Dracula was only in power for a matter of months as Prince of Wallachia, when he was ousted again by the Hungarians, Transylvanians and Wans, and his cousin Vladis II was yet again reinstated as VOD after he had returned from his campaign against the Turks. Vlad was consequently forced briefly into exile, settling in neighboring Moravia in order to avoid further problems at home while in Moravia. Vlad spent time in the company of his uncle Prince Bogdan II and his cousin Prince Stephen until Bogdan was assassinated in October of 1451 by Petru Aaron Bogdan's brother. Vlad and Stephen fled to Transylvania through the Borgo Pass, where the two men eventually fell into the care of John Hunyadi and the Prince of Hungary. Lisla Hunyadi had previously suffered some significant losses in Kosovo and Varna over the course of the past couple of years, costing him influence, power and prestige. He had lost two of his titles, those of Viceroy of Hungary and Governor of Transylvania, and was facing further distrust from the Hungarian Diet or Parliamentary Assembly. These setbacks aside, he maintained several estates throughout his domain and still commanded a mighty military force which he could call upon at short notice. Hunyadi decided to show Vlad mercy, despite his recent transgressions, knowing Dracula's hatred could be useful if targeted at the Turks. Furthermore, Vlad's intimate knowledge of the Ottoman Empire, having spent years at the Sultan's court, could make him a significant and invaluable advisor for Hunyadi if quoted correctly, while the shared hatred for the Turks of Hunyadi and Vlad, as well as the growing disillusionment between Hunyadi and Vladislav, may have also been a contributing factor in the truce. Hunyadi, who was, of course, responsible for the death of Vlad's father and brother, needed allies, and Vlad needed protection. Each could provide the other with exactly what they required in the short term. It is not known for sure whether a genuine peace had been reached, or whether there was simply a mutual understanding of Vlad and Hun's need for each other when Mehmed II ascended the Ottoman throne in January of 1451. Vladislav sent congratulations to the new Sultan and restarted the two-sided alliance between Wechia and its neighbors, extending its hospitality and service to both the enemy realms of the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. This arrangement both protected and threatened Wechia, but gave Hunyadi an opportunity he could extend to Vlad. Dracula, to help him fight the Turks, Vlad was offered a military posting under Hunyadi and also granted a place at his court. Hunyadi brought the young man with him to the Hungarian Diet and continued to instruct him in the arts of war and to further his nobleman's education. Tula swore fealty to Ladislas when he was crowned as King of Hungary, and Hunyadi was able to make pay with his former enemy, Count Alchili, a supporter of the new Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick III, and relative of the previous Emperor Sigismund. Meanwhile, while Vlad's influence amongst the Hungarians was growing in the late 1440s and early 1450s, his rival for power in Wechia, his cousin Vladislav II, was finding his own position compromised during these years. In October 1448, another major battle had occurred between the Ottomans on the one hand and the Hungarians and their allies at Kosovo. The campaign had been led by John Hunyadi as a kind of religious crusade, including contingents of German mercenaries. Vladislav did not send any aid personally, despite the appearance of some 801s on the field of battle. In autumn, the battle ended in a crushing defeat for Hunyadi and his allies, opening the way for the Ottomans to initiate a final assault on Constantinople without fearing any major military unrest in the Balkans. In the years that followed, for his part, Hunyadi never forgave Vladislav for his betrayal. A diplomatic and trade war was consequently initiated by Hungary and Transylvania against Wechia in the years that followed, and the Hungarian commander was increasingly in favor of having Vladislav removed from the Vovoa ship and replaced by Vlad. Dracula. 5 years later came the seismic event in the expansion of Ottoman power in southeastern Europe. On the 29th of May 1453, under the command of Sultan Mehmed II, the Ottoman Empire conquered the city of Constantinople, ultimately destroying the remnants of the Byzantine Empire and establishing the Ottoman Empire's capital there, the great church of Hagia Sophia, which had been built as a Christian cathedral over 900 years earlier, was converted into a mosque. The fall of Constantinople to the Turks, who wielded a mighty army that went unrivaled across the continent, opened up the possibility that the Sultan Mehmed II could now threaten much of southeastern Europe, and John Hunyadi was advised that because of Vladislav's relationship with the Sultan, the next assault on European lands would probably fall on Belgrade. If Belgrade fell, this would open the Kingdom of Hungary to further assaults by the Turks, especially by the Turkish fleet, which could use the Danube to sail into the cities of Vienna and Buda. In the winter of 1455 to 1456, the Ottoman army was raised near the fortress of Adrianople, or what is today Idna, in northwest Turkey. St. John of Capistrano, the Minot Franciscan monk who would later be canonized by the Catholic Church, spoke at Hungary and inspired others to action against the Ottomans, exclaiming, "God wills it that we chase the Turks out of Europe." Such words had rallied millions to crusade over the course of the past 4 centuries, and Hunyadi, Vlad and Hunyadi's son Lo, had been in attendance, moved by the call for a new crusade against the impending invasion of the Ottomans. Vlad was instructed to stay in Transylvania and given permission to launch attacks against Vladislav II, which would potentially alleviate pressures on Belgrade and pull Ottoman focus away from their objectives in the city. Vlad was more than happy to oblige. Vlad led several excursions throughout Wallachia and Transylvania to harass and overwhelm Vladislav, who found himself combating both the standing armies and recuperating from small skirmishes. These culminated in a meeting at the market town of Tara. On the 20th of August 1456, here Vlad the Impaler met Vladislav on the field of battle as their armies prepared to fight one another, but before a wider clash of Vlad rode across the field and challenged his foe to hand-to-hand combat. Vladislav agreed, and in the clash which ensued, Dracula killed Vladislav II. Thus, after nearly 9 years, he had finally avenged himself on the man who had overthrown and killed his father and brother in the days that followed. Vlad regained the VIP of Wallachia and established himself as the undisputed ruler of the principality. Upon taking up the see of Wallachia, Vlad took the title Prince Vlad, son of Vlad the Great, sovereign and ruler of Wallachia and the duchies of Umlash and Fagaras. The duchies had been granted to him by King Ladislas. For returning to his favor, he worked with local mayors in Transylvania and Hunyadi Sunlo, the new commander of Belgrade, to establish a relationship with them and protect his borders to the north. He tried to incite the Boaz to revolt against his Mavian enemy Petar Aaron, another local Boilan prince, who, like Vladislav, too, had thrown in his lot some years earlier with the Ottomans in 1457. Just a few months after acquiring control of Wallachia, Vlad's cousin Stephen was also successfully installed in Moldavia, following the overthrow of Petru Aaron there, and thanks to the dissidents Vlad had aroused with the Boaz and a troop of around 601s. By now Vlad began to develop his identity as both a violent and strict leader as well as a strong commander with a mind for social and economic preservation of the Wakan state. He bolstered the military and economy and rebuilt villages to allow local merchants to thrive while restricting foreign trade to help the local market to grow. The Ottomans sent emissaries to Vlad Dracula following his rise to power in an attempt to acquire tribute and a free passage through Wallachia for the troops as a show of loyalty to the Turks, but Vlad refused to travel to Constantinople to pay homage to the Sultanate. Around this time he rebuilt some of the walls around his cities and fortifications, and also began to embrace the practice of impalement as punishment, a common practice used to execute prisoners and traitors of the Ottoman Empire, something he must have witnessed as a young hostage. The first targets of Vlad's wrath were those responsible for the death of his brother and father, particularly the Boaz in Wallachia and Transylvania. He seized their assets, lands, and other commodities, which he then redistributed to his allies, and captured his enemies and brought them into his custody. The Boer were then executed, mainly through the process of impalement, and the bodies were propped up around his realm. As a warning, his methods were both a message to his foes and a means to eliminate those who had dared to challenge him. Other methods of torturous death Vlad had allegedly carried out included allowing animals to feast on his victims, exposing them to the elements, burning them alive, cutting off body parts such as fingers, toes, limbs, eyes, ears, noses, tongues, breasts, nipples, penises, etc., skinning them alive and boiling it. Was said he would sometimes feast while people were impaled or tortured, revving while people died around him. If we are to believe the tales of Vlad the Impaler's beastly behavior, then women were subjected to some of the worst abuses at the hands of the prince, particularly with respect to their sexual fidelity. If a woman was discovered to have had an affair while married or had been promiscuous while unmarried or widowed, Vlad apparently treated them to especially severe punishments, including mutilation and impalement on a hot poker while their lovers watched in horror. The paramour would often be made to be involved in the torture. forced to consume the mutilated body parts, while their partner bled out. How much of this supposed behavior should be literally believed is open to interpretation. Much of it may have been the fanciful imagination of writers in the more civilized climes of Vienna and Buda, writing about a supposedly savage bordel far away in Wallachia. Some of this brutality is more attestable. For instance, Vlad was especially violent towards foreign peoples. On his lands there were populations of Saxons or Germans from the southeastern region bordering on what is today Poland and the Czech Republic, who settled throughout the Wakened Principality and served as a separate community within the realm. In one notable story, Vlad learned that a Wakened merchant in the city of Brazo had his goods taken by Saxon merchants who had refused to pay him. Vlad allegedly had all the Saxons in Brasov rounded up and impaled for their treachery towards a Wakened citizen. The extent of this is again unclear, but there were extensive pogroms of the Saxons in Wallachia around the mid-6th century. Legends surround Vlad Dracula pertaining to his cruelties, but also to how much his own people feared his wrath. One famous story concerned the Golden Cup, a magnificent chalice that was placed in the town square of his capital, Tvisha, in plain view of all who passed by. The statute of the golden goblet was simple. Anyone could use it to drink from, but the cup could never leave the confines of the square. At the time, there were around 60 individuals living in Tisha. The cup was never taken during Vlad's reign. Such was the fear he is believed to have inspired in his subjects. Vlad was also said to have been faced with a large population of poor individuals and had to come up with a means of ending poverty in Wallachia. To do so, Vlad supposedly invited hundreds of the impoverished from Tisha to a massive feast where they reveled in the generosity of their prince and ate and drank to their heart's content. Vlad responded by locking the doors of the hall and setting it ablaze. No one escaped. These stories became commonplace and were sensationalized by the Turk, Saxons, Hungarians, Transylvanians, and other enemies Vlad made over the course of his life, while his subjects became all too familiar with his punishments. Vlad the Impaler also showed a deep devotion to military and political deeds, such as helping his cousin, Prince Stephen, take the Marvian throne in 1457, providing about 60 cavalrymen to fight against Petruian. Stephen in return helped Vlad combat the continual raids and attacks by the Ottomans against the southern border of Wallachia, attacks which were initiated by the Sultan Mehmed II in response to the new crusade declared by Pope Paul II against the infidels in January 1460. Vlad Dracula joined the effort, which was now led by John Hunyadi's son Matthias Corvinus, allying himself with Corvinus to combat the Ottomans. Mehmed took the last independent city in Serbia, Smo, in a violent assault in 1459. Just a few months later, Vlad's ally, the Hungarian general Mihaly Shaji, was captured during a battle near Bazas and was sewn in half after being tortured, a grim fate which many of his men suffered. The Sultan then took several cities in Greece and threatened to return to Wallachia unless tribute called Gizya was paid to him. Envoys were sent to Vlad's court to collect both the money and men for the Geyser forces. It was at this juncture, in 1460, that Vlad Dracula decided to clarify his position towards the possibility of any relationship with the Turks. When the emissaries arrived, he asked them to take off their turbine, part of the traditional wardrobe of an Ottoman, because removing the hat in the presence of a Wakened prince, especially in his court, was customary and expected. The diplomats refused, as it was part of their attire. Vlad informed them he would not give the Sultan anything and would not negotiate, and promptly had the representatives' turbine nailed to their heads as a form of symbolic rejection of any claims to Turkish overlordship in Wallachia. It was certainly a blunt and effective one. Meanwhile, the Turks began recruiting troops as they crossed the Danube and led assaults against the Transylvanians, to which Vlad promptly responded by impaling any prisoners his men took in the conflict. In November 1461, he wrote to the Sultan explaining that he was unable to pay tribute due to financial issues, but noting that he would be willing to go to Constantinople to negotiate a deal. The Sultan heard of Vlad's renewed alliance with Corvinus at this juncture and attempted to lure Vlad into a trap so that he could capture him to bring him to Constantinople in chains. Instead, Vlad learned of the plot, and he set his own trap for the Sultan's bey, or chieftain, of Nicopolis, Hamza Pasha, and his men in a narrow pass north of Giorgio, using gunpowder to easily overpower the Turks. The bey and his men were quickly surrounded and defeated by the Transylvanian army. Vlad the Impaler then had the Turkish troops killed by impaling them. He had Pasir skewed on a stake that would stand taller than his men to signify his rank and place. He had the staked bodies placed in a field forming a macabre forest. Vlad was evidently perturbing the Sultan in Istanbul. At this stage, when he was informed of the ambush, he is said to have struck the messenger who delivered the news. In fury at this later setback, Vlad now undertook a fierce campaign into Ottoman lands in the spring of 1462. Because of his fluency in Turkish, Vlad was able to infiltrate the Ottoman territories on the other side of the Danube, leading his forces through the Turkish-occupied regions of Bulgaria. In between the Black Sea and Serbia, he would demand the gates to open for him, and once they did, he would lead an army into the fray. Vlad the Impaler executed every soldier and Ottoman sympathizer. Traveling over 800 kilometers during the course of 2 weeks, they killed well over 23,000 Turks and allies, impaling them and leaving their bodies on the stakes for others to see. In response, the Sultan sent his men to destroy the port of Brela in Wallachia, but the 18,000-man force he had sent under his Vasa Mahmud were defeated by Vlad and his troops, leaving only around 80 Ottomans alive. These victories solidified Vlad's place in Europe as a successful warlord, a fearsome defender of Europe's borders against the Ottoman infidels. For a short time at least, he was celebrated by the Pope and was revered by Christians, but was deeply feared by Muslims. The Sultan grew infuriated at the news of Vlad the Impaler's continuing successes and turned to deal with the prince himself. Both rulers now prepared their armies for the upcoming conflict. The Sultan raised an army of between 10,000 and 300,000 men, comprised of his bodyguards, engineers, women for comfort, priests, astrologers, riflemen, pikemen, cannons, slave soldiers, archers, infantry, jerrys, and cavalry. Dracula's brother, Radu, even served as part of the mustered Turkish forces, commanding around 4,000 cavalrymen. Vlad rallied a significantly smaller force, especially since Corvinus did not aid him despite Dracula's request for assistance. Men, women, and children aged between 12 and 18 were recruited, including Roma, slaves, and farmers, building an army of around 30 poorly trained, armed, and armored Transylvanians. Even though he was vastly outnumbered, Vlad the Impaler and his force was able to kill around 300 Jerrys after the Sultan left Vidin, and he knew the only way to win was to commit unthinkable and vicious acts. Vlad could not hope to win against the Ottomans in the field. Now the best he could hope for was to wage a guerrilla campaign in country that he and his forces had greater knowledge of, and in which they would have greater local support. The Prince of Wallachia ordered the evacuation of the neighboring territories, removing the people and animals from the land. As the Sultan's army advanced, He poisoned the rivers and lakes with the bodies of animals and humans and burned farmland. To destroy crops in a scorched earth tactic, this would leave nothing for the advancing Turks but barren fields, knowing his army would be no match for the Ottomans. Vlad resorted to night raids to harass the Turkish opponents. Vlad also ordered men, women, and children who were suffering from contagious diseases such as bubonic plague, leprosy, tuberculosis, or chera, to travel to the Ottoman camps or to stay in villages that would be in the path of the invaders. This would potentially infect the area and help contaminate the Turks with the illnesses. Vlad was essentially using germ or biological warfare here to slow down the Ottoman advance and deplete their forces. These efforts were clandestine and incredibly effective in causing problems for the Ottomans in their attempts to take Waqia, the capital of Waqia, the city of Tarago. Visha, home to Vlad Dracula's Pinari castle, was met with the advancing Turkish troops, who previously had been unable to take either the island of Snagov or the fortress of Bucharest. Vlad ordered his 24,000 men to take refuge in the mountains near the capital as the Ottomans reached the city limits, knowing that he and his men would either die at the hands of the Sultan's army or from starvation should they hunker down in the mountains. Vlad the Impaler implemented his education and past experiences to escape. Vlad disguised himself once more and snuck into the Ottoman army camp, passing by unnoticed thanks to his mastery of the Turkish language, and made his way through the tents he discovered. The Sultan had ordered his men to remain in their tents to keep them from losing their nerve. Should they fall under attack, he uncovered the location of the Sultan's tent and then slipped back to his camp in the mountains to plan an attack on Memp's men and assassinate the Sultan in his tent. Later on the evening of the 17th of June, 1462, the Prince of Waqia split his men into two divisions and had them set to attack from either side of the camp, using the Turkish prisoners to help them infiltrate the camp's outskirts. The first wave hit and rolled through the camp. The opposite side did not act. The ones slayed around 15,000 Ottomans, losing only around 5,000 men in the process. Vlad Dracula inadvertently entered the wrong tent. Nevertheless, the incident, which has become known as the night attack on Tegovisia, has gone down in history as one of the most daring elements of Vlad's colorful career, the episode in which he nearly managed to infiltrate the Ottoman camp and slay the conqueror of Constantinople as dawn rose. Vlad the Impaler and his men retreated to the mountains and escaped without any pursuers. Many of the Ottomans were disheartened and wanted to head back towards the Ottoman lands, but Sultan Mahmud ultimately determined to continue the campaign. Yet just hours later they came upon the mob field, which Vlad had decorated months earlier with the bodies of Hamab Pasha and his 20,000-man army. The Turks were horrified by the scene, which even by the standards of Bulan warfare in this brutal period was particularly shocking. Consequently, the Sultan now ordered his men back, leaving Radu with his Jerrys to oversee affairs near Tarago Vishka. On the 22nd of June, there is a myth that Dracula's first wife, a woman who has never been officially named and whose identity has been left to the legends of Romanian history, saw the arrival of Radu and his men at the base of the castle at Tarago Visha, perched up high on the cliffs overlooking Tavisha and the Uresh River. Despite having one son, Enya the Bad, with Vlad the Impaler, further details about her remain unknown. The legend, though, is that at the sight of the Ottomans, Vlad's wife is said to have remarked she would rather feed the fish than be taken by the Turks. She then threw herself to her death in the waters below. Radu now established himself as the new ruler of Waqia, while the Ottomans moved on to burn the city of Brela. Radu Dracula led several attacks throughout Waqia, while his brother and the remnants of Vlad's forces hurried to the town of Chilia. Here Stephen III of Mavia had initiated a siege, hoping to take advantage of the distress his former close ally found himself in as a result of the massive Ottoman invasion of his lands. Vlad and his army successfully repelled Stephen and his forces, injuring Stephen in the process. But despite this limited success, Vlad was forced to flee to Hungary, to seek aid from Matthias Corvinus, to plan future battles and strategies in Hungary. By the end of the autumn of 1462, Vlad believed that he had successfully acquired Hungarian support to launch a counterattack against the Ottomans the following spring, but Corvinus had actually planned a trap at Castle King's Rock, capturing Vlad just as he crossed into Wacchia. Why Corvinus betrayed Vlad is not precisely known, although it has been suggested Corvinus hoped to be named Holy Roman Emperor, and it would have been in his interest to end any aggression with the Ottomans so that he could turn his attentions towards Central Europe. Whatever the purpose of it, Corvinus would not be named Holy Roman Emperor, although in 1464 he was dubbed King Matthias of Hungary. Vlad fell victim in late 1462 to his having been a border warlord, caught between the Hungarians and the Ottomans. Despite his determined opposition to the Turks, over a decade-and-a-half-long period, he was still distrusted in Buda, and as a consequence he was imprisoned on suspicion of coordinating with the Sultan. Despite how improbable this seems, between 1462 and 1466, Vlad was first detained in Orsia, fortress located in Padu, Dambovitsia today, then in Vishrad. Over the course of this period, King Matthias and Vlad's relationship grew more favorable, though he was not released in the meantime. His brother, Radu, the real collaborator with the Sultan, ruled Wacchia as the new Voar during the early years of his house arrest. Vlad Dracula converted to Catholicism and married Ilona Shogi, cousin to King Matthias. He was given greater freedom. In 1466, Vlad and Ilona were also gifted a home in Pez, one of the two towns on either side of the Danube, along with Buda, which would later join to become Budapest. Here they lived with their two sons, Vlad, Fatus, and Mircea. Vlad spent many years here, settling into a seemingly sedentary retirement, but in truth he longed to return to Wacchia and reclaim his position there. To this end, in the mid-1470s, after well over 10 years in Hungary, Vlad Dracula reached out to Stephen V. Bori, a prominent military commander, future Vo of Transylvania, Hungarian judge, royal and ally of King Matthias, to help him with the task of building an army comprising of Mavian, Hungarian, Transylvanian, and Wakan forces. The mission for Stephen and Vlad was simple: take Wacchia from Prince Bazara Blotacellan, who had claimed the VO votership from Vlad's brother Radu in late 1474 or early 1475. Ru appears to have died shortly thereafter while trying to reclaim the position himself. Though the details of his death are unclear, this left Vlad as the only Dracula, a legitimate son of Vlad II Dra, left to seek the position of VOD, and Vlad, who was nearing his 50th year by this time, was determined to reclaim it. He managed to do so with little effort. Vlad and Stephen's forces arrived in the autumn of 1476 and met no resistance. Instead, Bosarab army fled and allowed Dracula to resume his rule over Wacchia. Stephen Bori returned to Transylvania, leaving Vlad alone to defend his land from any threat. Vlad did not have long to enjoy his reclamation of the rule of Wacchia. Not long after his reestablishment on the Waccan throne on the 26th of November 1476, Vlad's lands were once again besieged by a large army of Ottoman Turks, who campaigned north against him in an effort to reimpose Basarab as a Ottoman v Vlad found he had only around 2,000 men to fight the Ottomans' force of even in excess of 4,000, who relatively easily crushed his Waken army. Vlad also died around this time, though the exact date and details of his death are not clear, though it was known he had died by the 10th of January 1477. He might have died on the field of battle against the Turks, or may have been betrayed by his Waken Boer enemies and murdered, or was injured in a hunting accident which led to his death around the time of the new Ottoman invasion. There are several myths regarding Vlad, Dracula's demise, that have helped fuel the myth of Dracula throughout the world. A few believed Dracula was not killed during this period, instead being captured and ransomed, then moved to Italy, remaining there until his death and being buried at Santa Maria Nova Church in Naples. This theory has frequently been disputed and contested by other archaeologists, historians, and researchers who find the evidence supporting this notion almost entirely lacking and unsubstantiated. The most commonly accepted story about his death says that Vlad the Impaler met his end at the hands of the Ottomans, either being captured by the Turks, beheaded, having his head preserved in honey, and then put on a pipe to be brought to Istanbul as evidence of his death, or being impaled in the same manner. He had become infamous, for either way the lore of his reign was the stuff of legend and became intermixed with the truth of his life. It is not known exactly where Dracula was buried, although there were rumors that he was interred callously by his adversary, Basarab the Elder, at the K monastery which Vlad had established and constructed in 1931. Archaeologists found a casket draped with a purple and gold veil at the Snagov Monastery in Bucharest. Aside from a skeleton, the coffin contained pieces of silk brocade, a ring like one worn by members of the Order of the Dragon, and a crown reminiscent of an oil painting of Vlad the Impaler. Was this Vlad himself? The contents of the grave of Snagov were taken to the History Museum of Bucharest to be studied, but all the artifacts and bones promptly vanished, adding further to the mystery and legend of Vlad Dracula and the whereabouts of his corpse. In the aftermath of Vlad's death, the Principality of Wallachia continued to experience years of instability, being governed by short-lived rulers such as Basar Blotchild Batran, who briefly reclaimed the Voivodie at the time of Vlad's death, but who was then himself quickly overthrown by a new Hungarian-supported Voivodie. For throughout this tumultuous era, the principality was devastated as a result of being caught between the Ottoman Turks on one hand and the Christian powers to the northwest and the Kingdom of Hungary on the other. Thus, for instance, on the 13th of October 1479, the Battle of Bradfield was fought in nearby Transylvania, a major battle between the Hungarians, allied with the Serbs, Huns, and others, against the Ottomans. This was the largest battle yet fought in the Balkans to prevent the Ottoman advance in the aftermath of the fall of Constantinople, and ended in victory for the Hungarians and their allies. Ultimately, however, the Turkish advance was too strong, as sheer numbers led the sultans to begin imposing themselves more fully over Wallachia, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Serbia. In the early 16th century, this was compounded by growing divisions within European Christendom following the inception of the Protestant Reformation in the late 1510s. Thus, in 1526, Sultan Sulan the Magnificent defeated the remaining Bulan powers and the Hungarians at the Battle of Mo. Consequently, for the next 2 centuries, the Austrian Habsburgs were the front line of European Christendom defense, a role it had to perform on many occasions. Most notably in 1683, when the Turks threatened to capture Vienna itself, and during which they were only prevented from doing so by the arrival of the Polish army to relieve the Austrians. Given all of this, it is unsurprising to find that Wallachia, despite Vlad's efforts to resist Turkish Encroachments fell firmly under Ottoman control in the 16th century and remained in that position until the late 18th century, when Turkish domination was swapped for Russian geopolitical dominance in the region, perhaps. Unsurprisingly, when Romanian nationalism became a major force in the region in the course of the 19th century, Vlad was reimagined not as a brutal, sadistic ruler, but as a Romanian nationalist himself who had tried to resist Turkish subjugation of Wallachia. Today, Vlad Dracula is frequently considered to be a prime example of a human embodiment of evil. His violence and cruelties towards his own people and enemies became synonymous with his name. His most famous portrayal came in the form of Bram Stoker's Dracula, a late 19th century Gothic novel told from the letters of different characters regarding their interactions with a strange man Count Dracula, who was later revealed to be a vampire. Stoker took his inspiration from Vlad's name, but mainly from the mythology of Romania and the wider Balkans and other aspects of vampiric lore. How does one appraise a character such as Vlad III, Dracula, whose life is shrouded in myth, exaggeration, and fantastical tales? Firstly, it must be said that many of the tales about him were doubtlessly embellished and have been further so over the last 120 or so years, as sensationalist accounts have abounded. Of the life of the man who inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula, what should be said first is that Vlad was almost certainly not as tyrannical and bloodthirsty as many accounts of his life made him out to be. These exaggerated tales about him started early and have continued ever since Peters and writers in late 15th and 16th century Europe were just as anxious to concoct elaborate tales about the strange lord who lived on the peripheries of Europe and engaged in excessively cruel behavior. Thus, any assessment of Vlad the Impaler must be undertaken with a hefty dose of skepticism about what has been written about him over the last 550 years. And yet, these reservations aside, there is no doubting that Vlad's reputation must have come from somewhere. He did widely employ the tactic of impaling his enemies on spikes. Even though it may be fantastical to suggest over 100 people fell victim to this proclivity of his, equally he may well have widely employed torture and other terror tactics to try to rule Wallachia. But while it does not excuse his behavior, this must be viewed in context. What must be remembered in interpreting Vlad the Impaler's life was that he was living through a period of increasing brutality and slaughter in southeastern Europe, as the religious wars between the Christians of Hungary and the buffer states such as Wallachia intensified. Against the onslaughts of the Ottoman Turks, Wallachia found itself in the unenviable position of caught in the middle of the conflict between Christian Hungary and the Muslim Ottomans. Vlad was constantly being destroyed as both sides tried to impose their own candidates. From this perspective, he was not the real instigator of extreme violence in 15th century Wallachia. Rather, he was a product of a culture of violence. As Vlad III's shadow dissipates, we see once again how cruel and profound history can be. Completing this suffocating panorama, we understand the price of power. Take care of yourselves until we meet again on the next terrifying journey.